Okay, good.
So we're back with round 2 of Ghost Night. Me and Mom, of course, are here, and Gail, Nicole, and Sienna, and Aaron, our photographer, are all here tonight sharing stories. So we hope you enjoy them.
Gail liked it so much she came back for a second night with us,
Yeah.
which we love. Sienna joined us tonight. She's going to have some stories for us. I think we're going to get excited about that.
With a wealth of knowledge.
Yes. And Nicole's just here to listen.
No, she's got some stories about her apartment.
Oh yeah, you do.
All right. Well, let's get into it.
This is what I'm learning about Sayler Park. I'm losing out. I always knew it was a haunted. I always knew it. There was energy everywhere here. I'm just always happy it's not in my new house.
All right, so this video that we're doing is all about spirits and hauntings. So to get started, I just wanted to give, because I'm really into the paranormal, I'm really into spirits and ghosts. So I watch a lot of shows, I've done a lot of research on it. So I just wanted to give kind of the basics of hauntings and spirits and different types, so that you have a basis of understanding. So there are 2 main types of hauntings. One is called residual and one is called active, and these are hauntings from people who existed, like actual people who existed and have passed over. Residual hauntings are things that they're not aware of our dimension. It's more like if something tragic happens, or it's like something just gets stuck in a loop and it just keeps repeating itself. It's more like trapped energy than an actual spirit being there, and it doesn't interact. It's not like an active haunting where you can talk to it, or it's just a loop of energy and the same thing happening over and over again. It's like a record just stuck.
You said it was like a stamp in time.
Yeah, kind of. So that's a residual haunting. Active hauntings are what most people experience. That's when you can communicate with a spirit, when a spirit is aware that you're there and you're kind of aware that it's there. That's when you can get EVPs, which are, if you do like a recording session and you capture a voice, that's called an EVP. An electronic voice phenomenon is what that stands for. And it's where, like, you can communicate with them. And that's when people have hauntings, or they name their ghosts like we all do. Those are active hauntings. Those are people that are kind of either trapped between dimensions or come back to visit from another dimension. And again, like I said, they're aware of us and we're aware of them.
So let me ask you a question. The first one, the residuals, can paranormal investigators find them?
Yeah.
So they're like on cameras. Like they're like when you take a picture, they're there, but they're not aware they're there.
Right. I mean, you can still capture bits and pieces of it, like on film, but it's not going to interact with you. It's just going to keep doing its thing, and it doesn't know that you're there, doesn't care that you're there. You can still capture it every once in a while, but it's not going to actively try to find you or actively interact with you.
So I'm liking that.
Yeah.
I like the residual dudes.
Yeah. And most active hauntings are friendly hauntings. You do have some evil hauntings. Basically, if a person was bad in real life, there's still going to be a bad energy in the afterlife. But most ghosts that hang around more because they just don't want to leave this dimension. This is where they're comfortable. They stay around in a house that they possibly lived in their whole lives. They just don't want to move on to that next phase. And then there's also demonic hauntings, which are kind of a whole separate thing. Demons were never human. They're just kind of these horrible, negative energy. Yeah. And yeah, those are the bad ones. Those are the ones that you need to get like an exorcist and get rid of, and probably move out of your house if you can't get rid of them. But for the most part, I mean, hauntings are just friendly ghosts who don't want to leave.
So, people who believe in paranormal. Now, don't you agree that they also believe that our world is dimensional?
Yeah.
Where a lot of people believe that you're here, or you're in heaven, or you're in hell. But
a lot of people don't even believe that. They believe that you're here and then you're dead and you're gone and there's nothing after that.
But the paranormal world, people who believe in that are educated in the paranormal world, they believe that the world is dimensional.
Yeah.
Like so those creatures, those demonic creatures, came from a not even of this world that we're aware of.
Right.
So they came from another world.
And if you believe in heaven and hell, they came from hell. If you don't believe in heaven and hell, if you believe in dimension, it's all kind of believing in the same thing. It's just whether you put religion into it or not. So we basically just believe that they're from another dimension that is like the demonic dimension. And there's, from what I've researched and stuff, there's like 9 dimensions. We live in the 3rd dimension. And then the 4th dimension is what you cross over to. The 5th dimension is like angels. And then there's, I don't know what dimension is demons, but it's interesting. If you ever want to research it, just search the 9 dimensions. So
it is interesting. I mean, it's for sure interesting. So that's a little bit about, you know, what we're all interested in right now, and what this video is going to be all about. Obviously, it's about the hauntings of Sayler Park, this particular first video. So you're going to see all of our interviews that we've done. And I've said it a couple times in some of the other videos. Some people are willing to get on camera and tell their story. Some people are afraid to get on camera and tell their story, not only because they fear the camera, but they fear telling the story.
Right.
And almost everyone doesn't want us in their home telling the story because they feel like they don't want to stir the pot. Like they don't want to talk about it inside the home. So that's why we kind of thought, well, we'll do this then. You know, we'll do this fire and no one's inside their home. You know, Erin's story is the closest because, you know, she's sitting outside of her home. But
Autumn's cool. She don't care if I talk about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of why you won't see us in anyone's home. A lot of people, well, almost everyone, they're like, no, we don't want to stir any pots. Most of the hauntings have kind of subsided, and they just didn't want to stir things
And
up.
I will say that, too. Like, I love paranormal investigation, but I feel like a lot of paranormal investigators do it wrong. Because they try to rile the spirit up, to get a reaction, to get some proof. Well, that's great if you can get evidence, but you're still not getting rock hard evidence, and all you're doing is pissing that spirit off. Like, you're not doing anything constructive as far as helping the actual people with their haunting. And so that's why, like, when we first discovered Autumn was here, like, I went back and forth about, do I hire a paranormal investigator, or do I just, like, call a psychic, or... So I opted for the psychic because she could just come in and read the energies of the houses without disturbing her and pissing her off. Like, I didn't want a paranormal team in here riling things up and stirring things up and aggravating her.
And they do that.
Right. So, I mean, if you're having a haunting, make sure you get a good paranormal investigation team if you want to go that route, that isn't going to come in and act ignorant.
Well, you know, I watch the paranormal activity or investigation shows. I even say sometimes, like, you're pissing me off, and I'm not even the, you know, I'm not even the energy. I'm not even the whatever. So yeah, you're right. They do. I mean, they're mean sometimes. Okay, so the first story that Erin and I are going to tell together, because we both have a piece of it, is about the house that my grandfather built when my mother and her sister were younger. They were like in their teens. So he built the house, lived in it his whole life, and then passed away. So after his passing, after my grandmother's passing, so he passed away first, then my grandmother passed away several years later. So nothing really happened right away after that anybody noticed. But then one day, my mother, who now lived in the house at this time, she was sitting in her kitchen, and she was making cupcakes for Erin's birthday to send to school the next day, because Erin was staying with her. Erin's dad was in the hospital going through a health issue. Anyway, so the kids were staying with my mom. So my mom was in the kitchen making cupcakes, and how the kitchen works is it's a long, and then it's got kind of windows all in the like dining area. So when you're standing at the counter where she was standing, you know, there's windows and a door that you would be able to see in. So she said she kept getting this feeling, and I have to know, my mother is a non-believer. Like, she sees things all the time. It's almost like she can see things, but she doesn't, you know, she's just like, whatever. She's always chalking it off to something else. But anyway, so this particular time, she said that she kept feeling like something was watching her. And it was like dusk, you know, it was getting dark. And she kept looking, you know, to the side, like it's something looking in the window, or one of the kids coming in. And then she would go, you know, slough it off and go back to she was icing the cupcakes. So she went on, and that happened several more times. So after it happening like a third time, she literally went out and turned on the light, looked outside, nothing. She went back to icing the cupcakes, happened again. She looked that direction, and she caught something out of the corner of her eye, and when she turned to look, there was my grandfather in a silhouette type thing. And she said, but it was so real, it just took her, didn't even phase her for a minute, and she was like, oh, Dad, I'm almost finished with the cupcakes, you can have one in a minute, because he was a big sweet tooth person. And then she realized, oh shit, Dad. So she turned back around, and as she turned around, he just kind of faded. So that was the first sighting of him, and for her to tell you that, that's big,
Right.
because she's a non-believer. So that's big. But now Erin has a story.
A couple stories.
Yeah, about that same house.
Right. And around the same time, shortly after my grandma moved into that house, me and my best friend at the time, we wanted to communicate. I've always been into the paranormal. I've always been into ghosts. So we had a Ouija board, but we lost it. So we decided to make our own. And I think that might be the reason
They
that it
didn't
worked.
lose it. I threw it away.
Right. Probably. So we made our own. We put this big cardboard piece of paper and drew all the letters on it, and then made our own little mover and everything. So we're downstairs, talking to it and asking for Granddad to talk to us. And we asked is Granddad here? It says yes. So then we said, what is your favorite snack? And it spelled out chocolate chip cookies, the longest word in the world. Took forever, but we got there. So of course I knew that. So we wanted to ask it something that we didn't know the answer to. So we go upstairs and we're like, Grandma, we think we're talking to Granddad on the Ouija board. Give us a question that neither one of us will know the answer to, or something that you want to know. So when my grandma passed away, a blanket had disappeared, a knit blanket that my grandma really wanted and was special to her. So she said, go ask him what happened to that blanket. So we went down and asked, and it spelled out Lois, who is my grandma's sister. And come to find out years later that Lois did take the blanket when she was
We
up
didn't know
visiting.
that at all at this time.
Yeah. So, and she lives down in Florida. So yeah, when she had come up for the funeral and to visit, she had put it in her suitcase and taken it home with her. And we didn't find this out until years later. But so that was weird. But, obviously we couldn't confirm that at the time either. So we're we go back upstairs and we tell her, it said Lois. And she's like, really? That's interesting. So then we're like, give us something that we can verify right now, but neither one of us will know the answer to. And she's like, Erin, I don't know. Ask him how much was in his bank account. So we go downstairs.
When he died.
Yeah, when he died.
Because she took over helping my grandmother with the finances.
Yeah.
Because, they're from old school. My grandmother never did the finances. My grandfather did it all. So my mom had to step in and help out, which is why she knew how much was in his bank account at the time of his death.
So we went down and asked him. And I forget the amount that it said, but we went back up and told her, and she was like, oh, okay. So we go back down, and we're asking more questions and just playing around with it. Well, a couple minutes later, she comes to the top of the steps, and she's like, Erin? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, I don't want to freak you girls out, but I just got out his statement, and that's the exact amount to the penny that's in there. And we were like,
in there.
oh, okay. So yeah, that was a really cool story. That was the only time we ever got it to work, the only time we communicated with him that way. But then a couple years later, my brother and I were both spending the night there. We were in the living room. I was sleeping on the couch bed, and he had a little cot that he laid at the foot of the couch bed, and we were both watching TV, had fallen asleep, and so it was the middle of the night.
Seriously?
I woke up and from the couch, from where you're sitting, you can see down the hallway to where her bathroom and her bedroom and stuff was. So I just kind of looked down that hallway, and right outside the bathroom door, I saw Granddad standing there. And I was just, my eyes were still blurry, so I'm focusing. And I mean, he was definitely standing there. It was him. It was nobody else. Once my eyes focused, I could clearly see him. And then, Grandma said, he just kind of faded away. So I'm laying there did I really just see that? So then I see Eric move, and I'm like, are you awake? And he's like, yeah, did you just see that? And I was like, yeah, I'm so glad you saw that too. So we had both kind of gotten woken up at the same time, saw it, and neither one of us knew the other was awake at the time, but it was just really interesting. So we both saw it. We both saw him in the same spot. So it was really cool. So,
and interestingly enough, Eric now lives in the house. You know, and they feel like the dogs see things. Like they feel like the dogs are seeing things. So, you know, no real great stories about that other than a couple of odd things have happened with the dogs in the house. But again, no one's afraid of that. I mean, honestly, I joke around a couple of times when Eric and Tatiana have been out of town, and we were actually just gone for the day, and they'd asked us to go over to let the dogs out and those types of things. Like, I would take, you know, my husband and I would go over, and when we go in the house, I'll always yell, "Granddad, I'm here," because I would love to see him. Like, I adored the man. But my husband's always like, "If you don't shut up, I'm going back in the car." So, you know, so I've never seen it, but I, you know, I do know my mom's story and, you know, her story. So, you know, enough people have seen it that he's there.
he at least visits.
He does. So that's that story of that house. Okay, so this is the house that my grandfather built. And that has the story about my grandfather. Son lives there now. My story is about the house that I grew up in over on Parkland Avenue. So we moved into this house when I was 10, and right after the tornado. We purchased it after the tornado. So I'm sure it has a history. It's an older house. I'm going to say it's probably dates back to the 1900s. So it's an older, creaky house. It had a stone foundation basement that was creepy. So the whole house was kind of creepy. My mother loved it. You know, she just loved it. I mean, it was beautiful. Don't get me wrong. It was a beautiful house. But, you know, as a kid, you don't want to live in Creepyville. But so how the house was built, it was originally built with 3 bedrooms. And older homes, I don't know if anybody noticed this about homes, because a lot of them changed this about older homes. Older homes have doors on almost every room because they were heated by fireplaces. So, you know, we'd shut the door so that the fireplace would heat the room. So in this house, the doors in the dining room that led from a hall to a hallway and then to another area, it still had the doors on this particular room. So then also about this house, from its original, the original house, there was a 2-story addition put on it. So a bed or a kitchen and a bedroom on top of the kitchen was added to the house. So my bedroom was the one that was on top of the kitchen. So I would go to bed at night and I would wake up and I would hear what I thought, you know, were kind of bumps and knocks and things like that, but then obvious opening and closing of cabinet doors because it wasn't gentle. It was open and slam. So, you know, as a kid, I would convince myself, oh, my mom must be up getting something, you know, 3 o'clock in the morning. My mom was the busiest person in the middle of the night in my mind that ever lived, because I was not going to let my mind go to where it truly should have went. So I would always say to my mom, "Mom, were you up last night?" And my mom caught on. You know, she knew I heard something. She heard things. So she would say, "Yeah, I was up getting a glass of water," you know, or whatever. So she was lying, but she knew that that was the best thing to do for me, because I would have been moving in with my grandparents. So anyway, so I mean, that went on for years, and she never really said anything. But then as we got older, she would sometimes say, like, "No, it wasn't her. Your brother was probably coming in." Because my brother was 5 years older than me. You know, so as the years went on, he was 15, 16, 17 years old. And he's out with his friends and, you know, driving and comes home. And again, I convinced myself, oh, that's who it was, Joe. So anyway, years later, we were in Florida. The rest of our family was in Florida except for my brother Bill. He was on the swim team, and he was not going to miss any of his swim meets. So he stayed back, and while we were gone, a series of things happened. And again, he freaked out about it, but I'd have been gone. So anyways, he came home one night. My dad owned his own business, and he had a desk in one of the rooms. And, you know, back in the day when phones were on cords that plugged into the wall, and this one is a desk phone. So the cord kind of stretched you know, tight, and you could easily like trip over it and it would fall off the desk. So my brother came home from swim practice one night and went upstairs, got in the shower, and as he was getting out, and we had a dog, and we always kept the dog like in the dining room kitchen area where those two doors could be shut so that it didn't roam the entire house and get into things. But anyway, so you know, he had put the dog away. The dog was in the dining room and he had gone up to take a shower. So when he got out of the shower, he heard what he thought was that phone falling off of the desk. So in his mind, he was like, oh my gosh, did the dog get out? You know, because the doors were loose. You know, you could easily open them up. So he thought the dog got out and tripped over the phone cord and knocked the phone off of the desk. So he came downstairs, and when he came downstairs, the dog was asleep in the dining room. Doors were shut. Phone was on the desk. So he thought, because he had just gotten out of the shower, you know, he thought, well, maybe I didn't hear what I thought I heard. Really creepy. Years later, when we were all grown and gone, my mom still lived in the house. She admitted that, yeah, all kinds of crazy stuff still was happening in that house. The other thing that happened in my house that I grew up in on Parkland was one time we were all sitting. It was me, my mom, possibly my dad, and whoever. So, me and my sister. So we were sitting in the living room, and the house had the old style fireplaces where, you know, had big cast, I guess they're made of cast iron, big iron fronts that when you pull them off, like the grates, you pull them off, they're extremely heavy. But the fireplaces were only, you know, shallow, older type. So we never used it. But I mean, it did go up through the chimney, and every room in the house, except for the addition, had one. But several of them were sealed up. So every bedroom had one as well. So above the living room was a bedroom that my brothers slept in, and it had a fireplace, but it was sealed over. So anyways, we're sitting in the living room, and all of a sudden we hear all this commotion like behind the grate of the living room fireplace, and we were like, what the hell was that? So we got up and took the grate back, and all this stuff had fallen from the top fireplace down to the one in the living room, and we started pulling this stuff out, and it was like old like spectacles, like the old very thin wired spectacles. There were some pictures, and there were some letters,
love letters,
and there were, what else did I say was in there? But there was just interesting newspaper articles dating back to the early 1900s. I mean, just full of stuff. Like all this stuff just fell, and some of it was even in like plastic, so that it was protected. So we don't know if it just, you know, through the years, like maybe like there was a mantle up there and it fell behind the mantle, and then all of a sudden just let loose. We don't know, but it was kind of interesting and creepy. But my mom still has some of the stuff.
Yeah, she definitely still has the love letters, because I've read them, and yeah, they're written in like the old, you know, the way people talked back in the 1900s, and my darling, dearest, blah blah blah. Like, it was really cool to read them. It was actually hard to read them. It was hard to understand them, you know, because of the way that they spoke back then. But it was neat.
It was hard to read something kind. But anyway, so yeah, so that was another thing that happened in that house, and so it definitely has some airplane.
UFO.
Not from the early 1900s. But anyway, so it definitely had some energy in that house, and I'm glad I don't live there anymore.
Yeah, Grandma named the spirit Kenny. That's when growing up, that's what she always called him. Every time I'd hear something, she'd say, "Oh, that's just Kenny."
Yeah, Kenny, because there was a man who owned the house before us. His name was Kenny. So that's who he was still alive when the house was being, he was still alive when the house was being haunted when we were younger. Now, when she was, well, I mean, she could call him Kenny when they were, because he was probably gone by then, but she couldn't call him Kenny when we lived there. So anyways, that's that story.
You gonna talk?
Oh, so this is the house that I grew up in, and when I talk on my story, this, where's your camera? Can you see my
right
finger?
there. I'm zooming in on it.
Okay, so that there above that small porch is where the kitchen is, and the window above that small porch was my bedroom. So that's when I talk about the addition that was put on. You can almost tell that it was an addition. That's the area of the house that I'm talking about. But you can see how the windows are floor to ceiling, like I spoke in the video. This is Gail, and she's going to tell us a story about a house that your daughter lives in. And Gail is a lifetime Sayler Park resident. She's lived, right? You lived here your whole life?
Well, outskirts
Well,
growing
that's
up.
still Sayler Park. She lived up on Hillside, past Bender. For anybody who knows that, but it's
I
close
lived on Bender
enough.
Hill.
Went to the school and everything.
Same
She went
school, same
We
high
grew up
school.
together. So she's
I'm older.
She's a generation. She's been here for generations. So she's got a story about her daughter's house that's here in Sayler Park.
All right. Hi, everybody. So my ghost story, I had to write down because just need to. My ghost story takes place in a house on Parkland Avenue that was built in 1868 or thereabouts, and it belongs to my youngest daughter. And I almost said her name. It was once a store. It's has a giant room in the front that back in the, I want to say 40s and 50s, so I'm told that it was a store, like a general store, and it was called Weilers or Wilders. Some of the longtime Sayler Parkers would be able to correct me on that, but that was the name of the store. It's also been a family home after that, probably several times, and then but bringing to the present, on a Halloween night after my daughter bought the house, which was probably in the last 6 years or so, we were outside passing out candy to trick-or-treaters, and a lady came along, and what she was talking about was part of the house where the tornado had hit, and that's what caught my ear. And I said, "Oh, did you grow up here?" Because I knew the kids. I knew one of the girls that had grown up in the house when I was a kid. And she said yes, and she said that, and then my daughter and myself were standing there talking to her, and she said, "Well, have you seen the kids yet?" And with that, my daughter that lives in the house just walked away and said, "I don't want to hear any of this, but my mom will listen." So she told me that in the living room, when you first walk in, there is a fireplace, a lot like what you're describing, with the metal in the front, but the fireplace itself it's a pretty fireplace. And she said they had to cover that up because when they were told, I guess, when they would burn in that fireplace, that they could hear kids screaming. So
Like screaming in pain?
I don't know. She just said screaming. So
I would be not covering up the fireplace. I would be leaving.
So after that, my daughter came back over and she said, "You want a tour?" And she took the lady on a tour, and she was crying. She said, "We had a lot of good memories here, you know." And she was tearing up, and then she left, and then that was it. And of course, I can't keep anything to myself. So I said, "Kathy, you've got to hear the story." So I told her her name.
That's all right. You say her name.
Splice that out.
You can. Yeah, you can.
I said, "You have got to hear this story." And so I said, it's about kids. And I said, and if there are ghosts of kids here, they're going to love you because you're a teacher. So that was the end of that. So she never did hear anything or have any experience like that. I told her the story. Yeah. So
it's possible that story had to do with the fireplace, and because the fireplace is closed up is why she never heard the kids.
Maybe, yeah. That could be too. Because it's closed up, yeah. So later on, she's in Florida, and just because I'm like Erin, I like paranormal stuff, and everybody here, obviously, and from watching Ghost Adventures, I saw what
I like it, but I'm not going to someone's house to find it.
And I'm not going to fight with them either. I was there. She was in Florida, so I always go and do stuff in her house when she's on these little trips to Florida or wherever she goes. And I was been watching Ghost Adventures and saw smudging. You know what that is? Isn't it called smudging?
What is it?
The burning of the
Sage.
what I did in there.
that
I grow
sage?
sage.
Of the sage.
Yeah,
Okay,
I grow I grow Russian sage. So I just cut a bunch of that and put it in a thing, set it on fire, and I found this little Bible that was Kathy's. It was a Precious Moments Bible, and so I just walked around her house and I'm reading from this and burning this sage. Went upstairs, went in every room. It said go to all the rooms and all the openings of the rooms, windows and everything. So I did that. Like I said, nobody was there but me. Nobody knew I was doing this. So I went to the basement and I stopped on the steps. I couldn't do it. She didn't have a light bulb in the basement because she just didn't replace it. So I just couldn't go any further. On the way back up the basement steps, I burned my hand. I burned the crap out of my hand. So,
So do you think you burned your hand because something made you burn your hand, or you just weren't holding the thing
I
right?
mean, I was holding the thing right. Gave me the
Are you ready?
Yeah.
What gave me the idea of doing this smudging was something else that was added to that. Was I was there with her one day, and she was in the room that was a storefront, and I was in the back where her laundry room is. And she walked back there. I don't even know what we were decorating or something. And she said, "Mom, did you just say something to me?" And I kind of did what your mom did. And I said, "Yeah, I did. I didn't, but I said that to her." And I think that's what made me think when she was gone, well, something's going on here. And when I was going around the house doing this smudging, I was saying, if there is anything here, this is my little girl. Take care of her. You know, that's exactly what I said. And so it wasn't long after that she was in her bed, sitting on her bed, watching probably the ID channel, because that's what she's into. One of her dogs, she had two at the time, ears perked up, and in the back of her
Damn
house,
dogs.
she said she heard clear as can be, "Is anybody back there? Is anybody back there?" And so she got up, went back, looked out the dining room door, went upstairs. She said it was as plain as could be. So she told me about that. I was delighted, but she told me about that, and it scared her, but she's still there. And then probably a couple more times it happened, and it would say, she said it would sometimes say, "Honey, are you there?" And there was a time when I was there by myself, and I was painting her bathroom, and my husband was in the backyard mowing, I think, and when I was painting, I heard, "Are you there?" That's what very softly, and I thought, well, that might be the TV or something, you know, so, but she has heard this voice a few times say, "Honey, are you back there?" You know.
Is it a female voice?
It's a female voice. It's a lady. And so I have to stop it. We don't feel afraid. Kathy's not really afraid of the ghost, if it is a ghost that she's hearing, because I'm there alone a lot if she's out of town. I don't ever feel afraid in the house or threatened in any way. And obviously nothing's ever hurt her, so she kind of feels like that, and well, me more than her, that if she's calling her honey and saying, "Are you there?" she sounds caring, so it doesn't seem to be a threat.
So does she think that the person is talking to her, or does she think the person is
It's
just
more of a residual.
Yeah, that's what I was
like
gonna
a
say.
residual,
Is it
yeah.
a residual? Like she's not even the person is not even aware that Kathy's there.
I don't know.
So they're speaking in their residual.
I don't know. It makes me wonder too, because I went around the house doing that smudging too. Did I awaken her and
Because nothing happened before that.
Right. After that happened, I was thinking about that last night. After that happened, after I did that is when she started hearing, "Honey, are you there?"
Well, and when I had that psychic come into my house to investigate Autumn, she did say that spirits like sage. She said if you want to make her feel welcome, and told me some things I could do, and one of them was burning sage. She said that makes spirits feel welcome. So,
All sage is coming out
good
of my house
spirits.
tonight.
Good spirits.
Well, I did say, you're welcome to stay here, but just watch over her, take care of her, So, this past summer, a teacher colleague, she's not even really familiar with him, had to bring something over to her house, and she said he stepped in the front door and said, wow, some people have died here.
Oh.
And he said, definitely a lady. And
So he's
he
like,
said she's not anything to be afraid of, but she's here. And she barely knew this guy.
oh wow.
So,
Well, he was just bold, wasn't he? He's just throw it all out there. By the way, did you know you're living with dead
well,
people?
she told him to shut up.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
So I would have said,
If
come
you don't have
on,
anything
let's
better
go.
to say, leave. Yeah. So is that your
This is Kathy's house that Gail told us the story about.
Okay, so Sienna just told us a story about when you first came to Sayler Park. And I found it so interesting. So I want her to tell it, and then I'm going to explain why I found it so interesting.
Well, it's pretty short. Before we bought our house here, when we were first going around looking at houses, there's a park kind of in the center of Sayler Park, Square Park, and I saw this little girl twirling, and I mean, she wasn't a real girl. She's too see-through for that, right? But yeah, she was just this twirling little girl, and she was like laughing, and I was like, wow, super happy ghost. Okay, this is a very welcoming area, all the way around on any level. And so yeah, that was the story I was telling.
Yeah. So she said it made her feel good because the girls seemed to be so happy and so free. But what I found interesting about that is just last night when we were sitting here, I was telling them how, and I might have even said it on one of the videos, but I was telling them how a lot of the stories that I've been told involved the little girl, including Erin's story. So I was joking around and said, I wonder if there's this little girl running around and, haunting all these houses or being present in all these houses. So when she said that, I just found that interesting that she's in the middle of the center of Sayler Park in Nelson Park.
Twirling and happy.
Twirling and happy. Going from house to house, possibly.
Yep.
So anyways, I just found that interesting. So that I was wanted.
This is Nelson Park. It is right in the center of Sayler Park. It is like our town square. This is where Sienna said that she saw the twirling girl. Here's the other side of Nelson Park. This is a better view of it. There's a stage right in the center. That's probably where she saw the twirling girl. That would make sense. We don't know that for sure, but
And then our veteran flag.
yeah, there's our veteran memorial.
Okay, so our next story is coming from Nicole,
Who is my sister-in-law.
who is Erin's sister-in-law. And Nicole is, again, not a long-time Sayler Park resident, but she lives in Sayler Park and has lived in Sayler Park for pretty many years. Off and on for a few years. Yeah, off and on. So her story comes to us from an apartment building. So she's our second apartment building story, and I'll tell you the second one when she's finished.
All right,
So,
go.
a few years back, I was living in the apartments on Revere back behind the drive-thru, if anyone knows the area. And when I moved into the apartment, I had to get a cat because it had mice. So the cat would hide all day. And then at 1 o'clock at night, it would come out and just meow from 1 o'clock until 3 o'clock in the morning, and then would go and hide. One night I was sitting watching TV, and the cat come out, was meowing, so I looked down the hallway, and there was a man walking down the hallway.
Mm.
He was about in his 40s, in a business suit, grayish tan suit, and he walked down my hallway and turned to go into the kitchen, just disappeared. And then a couple weeks later, I had someone staying at my house. They called and said they were going to come in, so I got up and unlocked the door and went back to bed. And it was about 10 minutes after I had unlocked the door, and I heard the doorknob turn. And the door hadn't opened yet, but as the doorknob turned, I had felt a hand on my leg and then a hand on my chest. And it freaked me out. I was up the rest of the night. And then I was only in that apartment for about a year, so on my last day there, I had left a cup sitting on my bathroom sink as we were moving the stuff out. And I'm guessing it made the guy mad because the cup went from the bathroom sink and was thrown across the bathroom into the bathtub and just rolled around the bathtub. And it was like, I was done.
I'd have been done when I saw him for the first time.
And another
And
thing
there was nobody on the other side of that door when you felt the hand on you?
No, it was just me, my two kids, which were in bed sleeping, and then
But you heard the door.
the doorknob, the front door to go out of the apartment. It wasn't in my bedroom. It wasn't my door to the bedroom. It was the door coming into the apartment. And another thing that bothered me was my kids would have riding toys that they'd keep in their bedroom. Well, before they go to bed, I'd make sure they got put into their room. But they, like, as I would go to bed, they'd be back out in the hallway. I could put them back, they'd keep rolling back out in the hallway. So it's just...
See, that's an apartment. I would be leaving that. I can understand where people can't leave their home because that's just not practical. But an apartment, no. But the other interesting thing about that apartment is someone did call me to give me a story. Now, I don't have the full story yet, and hopefully I'll get it. But she told me enough that it was that same apartment building, and she lives there now. And she said that one morning she woke up to something moving her bed sheets, and when she looked over, it was a small girl. And of course, she said she got up, she left, she wasn't going to go back in. It took her forever to actually go back into the apartment by herself without somebody with her. But it was the same exact apartment complex. Now, Nicole's was a man, and this was a girl, but still, same apartment complex. So I'm thinking, and I told this to the other girl that told me her story, I'm thinking that I know that there was something else on that property because those apartments were built after the tornado. So I know that there was something on that property beforehand. And what did you say you thought it was?
Well, they're back in at the end of Revere, there's a little street that goes over to Meridian.
Right.
The Historical Society says there was a jail back there.
And the apartment that I lived on, that little alleyway went alongside of that building. Because there's three buildings. There's one that faces away from Gracely, then there's one that sits along Revere, and the one that's diagonal along the alleyway that you were talking about. And it was the same owner that owned all three of those, but I lived in the middle building.
Which the man would make sense with the jail, but the young girl.
But he was in a business suit.
Yeah.
Like he had his briefcase, he was in his business suit, and it was like he was getting ready to leave for work, and he turned and went into the kitchen.
So I mean, for sure something else was on that property at some point.
Right.
Because like I said, those apartments were built after the tornado.
And there's a house there that's old. That's
Is
got
it
to be from the
vacant?
1800s. I don't know.
Is it across the street from those?
It's in that little alleyway.
It's in that little nook there.
Right.
So yeah,
gotta
so
be
something's
from
being picked
1800s.
up in that area for sure. So there's something in that area.
It is plain as day. I can still see his face. Like every time I think of it, I can still see his face.
Alrighty. This is the apartment that Nicole told us about on Revere. Okay, so I have one more story to tell. Our last one. I actually forgot it while we were around the campfires, but we wanted to tell it and then end the video on a thank you note. But anyway, so my last story is about a house that my cousins grew up in over at Elko. So they now live in Florida. But when they were up here and we were all younger, my cousin Janet was the only girl, so she was in her own room. And it was kind of like a Cape Cod home. So there were 2 bedrooms upstairs, and hers was one of them. So she had a period of time during the summer where she would have this sound, and everybody thought she was crazy. She was young, but so they all just thought, oh, you're hearing things. So she swore she could hear this sound. It was like a ticking sound. And so anyways, she asked me if I would spend the night with her because she was afraid. And I said, sure, because I was about 3 years older than her. But we were still young. Maybe she was, 8. I was like 9, 10, 11. So anyway, spent the night with her. And sure enough, so around 1 o'clock, she had this toy chest. It wasn't a box. It was like a chest. And she had her toys in it. And from that chest, you could start hearing like this ticking sound. It was like, just like a faint tick, tick, tick. And then if you kept listening to it, it would like climb the wall and up the ceiling and then behind her bed. And I heard it too. So, of course, by the time it got behind her bed, we were not in the bed. So, we got to the center of the floor and we yelled for her parents and they came up, and as soon as they came, it was gone. And then we didn't hear it for the rest of the night. So we were curious to see, does it really happen every night? Because she said she heard it every night. It just started out of nowhere. They had lived in the house for years, and then just all of a sudden started. So I spent the night again, and I did this like for a consecutive 2 weeks. And every single night, same thing. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, it would start, and it would do the same thing and go all the way. And as soon as it got to the bed, it stopped, but it stopped moving, but it still ticked. Until we would yell for somebody else to come in the room to hear it, and then it would stop. So it allowed her and I to hear it, but it would not. Every time somebody else would come in the room, it would stop. So I was there. I heard it as well. So that house is over on Elko, and yeah, I heard it. So that is our final story. And then so that's our final story. So that was that, and it was creepy. This is my cousin Janet's house. All right, well, thank you guys for joining us. That's all the stories that we were able to compilate for this, if that's the right word, for this edition. Yeah, we thank everybody who shared their stories, and there's still a lot of older houses in Sayler Park. I'm sure a lot more stories, so if you're watching this, if you have one you want to share, let us know, and hopefully we can get enough together and do another video. We would love to. But thank you guys for joining us on this video. We hope you enjoyed all these stories. We had a great time making this video and hearing all the stories. And I think you wanted to say one more thing? Yeah, so we did have a great time. It was a lot of fun. Exhausting, because we were up till like 1 a.m. for 2 nights in a row. A long time. It was fun. And anyways, we said on our introductory video that the Sayler Park is named after Nelson Sayler, which is true. But we weren't sure when he lived in Sayler Park. So we found out that his house, the Sayler Estate, was actually built in 1874, which we found was interesting because it was also destroyed.
Burned to the ground.
No, it wasn't burned to the ground. It was destroyed by the tornado
that's right.
in 1974, which was 100 years.
100 years.
So basically on its 100th year, it was torn apart by the tornado and then taken down, and now
it's apartments.
Now
it's townhouses.
Yeah, now it's crap. But anyway, so yeah, now Nelson Sayler Park is what is who lived here, and the fact that his house dated back to 1874, I'm assuming that's pretty much where
Sayler Park started.
Yeah, most of the houses around here were. There were probably a couple of farmhouses that were a little bit older, but gives a basis for how old these houses that we talked about are.
Yep.
So again, thanks for joining us. Thanks to everyone who came out and gave us the stories, or called and gave our stories, or sent messages and gave their stories. We really appreciated it. It was a lot of fun.
Yep.
And it's 2 videos. So this is the second video. So if you only saw this video,
Make sure you watch the first part.
So thanks a lot, guys.
All right, see ya.